This is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer reporting. Good evening. Well, it's quite a scene in Panama tonight on the eve of tomorrow's presidential elections there. 14 Americans, 9 of them members of Congress, arrived today. They're the latest group of observers who'll be on hand to monitor tomorrow's voting. But local merchants are preparing for the worst with a lot of anti-American feeling in the air and mindful of violent disturbances a year ago. They boarded up shops today and prepared for trouble. Juan Vasquez begins our coverage.
General Noriega's police threw up roadblocks this morning outside U.S. military bases in Panama City, including the headquarters of the U.S. Southern Command. It's the latest sign of trouble in an escalating war of nerves designed to test American patience in retaliation for U.S. economic sanctions.
United States official vehicle.
Just a few days ago, U.S. officers were run off the road by a Panamanian military car. No one was hurt this time, but U.S. officials claim there have been more than 700 incidents of harassment and intimidation of U.S. servicemen and their families. That includes detentions, beatings, and one alleged rape.
We've sent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of protest letters and only have received in the neighborhood of 40 replies.
Don't detain the buses with children on it. Last March, in the most troubling incident, Panamanian soldiers stopped a convoy of buses carrying American school children. Within minutes, there were soldiers from both camps all around, the children in the middle. After a tense standoff, the children were allowed to leave. The Bush administration played down the incident, but it left Americans here wondering just how far General Noriega will go.
They handcuffed me and threw me down on the ground and beat me with rubber hoses. And
Aldrich claims he was beaten when he went to a military office to try to clear up a legal matter. Employees of the U.S.-controlled Panama Canal have also been targets of intimidation by Noriega's regime.
They've confiscated their cars. They refused to issue them license plates. They've confiscated their bank accounts.
Noriega supporters claim U.S. economic sanctions make Panamanians the real victims.
This harassment is something very minor. When you see your country suffering so much for the economical aggression.
Meanwhile, the U.S. Southern Command says it could move all American military families back to the safety of the bases or out of the country if the U.S. continues on a collision course with General Noriega. Juan Vasquez, CBS News, Panama City.
As he stumped for his hand-picked candidate, Noriega today claimed that a vote for the opposition was a vote for U.S. control over Panama, while the opposition and U.S. officials have charged that Noriega plans to rig the vote in order to maintain his iron-handed military rule. State Department correspondent Bill Plant now with more on that.
The Reagan administration tried and failed to get rid of Panamanian strongman and alleged drug runner Manuel Noriega. But that hasn't discouraged the Bush administration. It's still attempting to dump Noriega at the moment by trying to discredit tomorrow's election.
That I have been very disturbed by the reports that the election will be less than free and less than fair and less than open.
For the past couple of weeks, the administration has kept up a daily drumbeat of charges that Noriega is rigging the outcome.
The Noriega regime continues its systematic campaign to discourage observation of the elections and independent reporting of the results.
What's more, says the State Department, Noriega has systematically padded the voter registration rolls as well as denied visas to journalists and election observers.
Noriega has really stacked the deck against the opposition in a whole variety of ways, and there's no chance that they'll be able to pull out a victory.
So if the deck is stacked in Noriega's favor, and there seems no disagreement about that, how does the Bush administration get rid of him? Economic sanctions haven't worked, neither has a federal indictment on drug charges. Under the terms of the treaties negotiated by President Carter, Panama is scheduled to take over the canal at the end of 1999. And now, some conservatives are suggesting that it may be time to reconsider.
The American people would not feel in any way comfortable turning control or administrative leadership of the Panama Canal over to a puppet government that is dominated by the dictatorship.
The Secretary of State says walking away from the treaty is not an option. A former U.S. ambassador to Panama is surprised that the president is in the middle of this fight.
What's extraordinary is that even before the election, President Bush has really put himself in exactly the same position that the Reagan administration was in, which was not successful in Panama.
What U.S. officials hope is that discontent in Panama over the elections will erupt into demonstrations or even into revolt. But short of that, About all that's left are solutions which have already failed, such as a negotiated deal, or solutions which aren't likely to be tried, such as military force. Bill Plant, CBS News, the State Department.
And still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, the President and Congress set to wage war over the minimum wage, and later Doug Tennell with something new on the scene on the Seine.
Check again.
We interrupt this transaction for a reminder.
So what's your approach?
There's one travel tip it pays to remember.
We've got one good option.
Choosing the card that actually pays you cash. Cash back for every charge. The Discover card.
Daddy loves you too.
Nice job, everybody.
It pays to Discover, the card that pays you back.
Imagine it's lunchtime. That's time for a change of pace at Red Lobster.
We'll make your mouth water.
With luscious lunch specials, many under $4.99.
Make your heart melt.
And served in 15 minutes guaranteed, or it's free.
Make you flip with every dip, feel like you've never felt.
So much that's delicious. Seafood pasta, or today's fresh catch at Red Lobster. Imagine it for lunch tomorrow. Try our lunch shrimp trio, just $4.95.
What's fair is fair. And frankly, Price Pfister is the fairest faucet of them all. Starting with the fabulous finishes they offer outside, right down to the feat of engineering that's inside. The quality is formidable, thanks to a heart of solid brass. And another fine feature is how affordable it is. So find yourself a Price Pfister, the fabulous faucet with a funny name.
It was an eerie scene in parts of the South today. Houses were reduced to piles of rubble by a series of devastating thunderstorms and tornadoes. At least 16 people were killed. Cars were tossed around like toys. Trees pulled right out of the ground. In Maryland, flooding caused a parking lot to collapse, creating a multi-car pileup. High above the Earth, the Atlantis astronauts have now passed the halfway mark in their 4-day mission. They passed the time today with experiments in science and show business. Peter Van Zandt has our report.
We did sleep well, and we're ready to roll today.
Rock and roll might be a better description. The 5-member crew today turned the shuttle into Camp Atlantis, shooting home movies, mugging for the camera, and having lots of fun.
Okay, here we have your basic cow. It's an Angus cow. I'd like to say hello to all the farmers of America. One of your own is up here.
During a cabin pressure test, astronauts Mark Lee and Norm Thager did an imitation of bodybuilders Hans and Franz from the show Saturday Night Live.
We're here to pump you up.
You know, David, in Sweden they have a word for us.
And what is that?
They call us hooks.
The astronauts also took time to point their new camcorder out the window, getting some spectacular pictures of the Earth below.
Okay, Mark swinging over to the Mississippi Delta.
That is coming in real clear, real nice.
There was also time for science, studying lightning storms on Earth, and mission specialist Mary Cleve growing crystals in zero gravity.
Okay, Mary, we're all watching down here, and it looks great.
Meanwhile, the spacecraft Magellan, released by Atlantis 2 days ago, has now passed the moon on its 800 million-mile journey to map the planet Venus.
It just is opening up a whole brand new era of, I hope, planetary exploration. I hope the United States is wise enough to continue to keep the planetary exploration going on a long-term basis on a regular schedule.
Later this year, 2 more major space science projects are scheduled to ride on the shuttle: the Galileo satellite, which will explore Jupiter, and the Hubble telescope, an instrument which was supposed to be placed in orbit in 1986, but which now only operates in animation.
We have essentially a standing crop of people who signed on to do Magellan, to do Galileo, to do Space Telescope, and they've been standing around waiting.
But that scientific waiting line is shortening now that the shuttle is flying again and the U.S. space science program is back in business.
Looks like a beautiful day.
Peter Van Sant, CBS News at the Johnson Space Center.
With sport fishing season opening today in Wisconsin, police were out in force to head off fights between fishermen using rods and reels and Indians who got a 2-week head start with the spotlights and spears that only they are allowed to use. Gary Reeves now reports on that.
Fishing for walleye pike on the lakes of northern Wisconsin is supposed to be peaceful. But the rod and reel fishing season was kicked off with a near riot last night when 1,000 angry fishermen protested against Indians exercising their right to spearfish. More than 100 were arrested. For the Chippewa, spearfishing is protected under treaties signed in the 1800s. But every night since their season opened 2 weeks ago, they have been harassed by people upset that the Indians get a head start and can take 60% of this year's legal catch.
I just don't think the situation as it stands right now is fair to everybody. I'd like to see everybody get a square shake out of this.
The walleye is the heart of Wisconsin's multi-million-dollar sport fishing business, but heavy spearing has lowered the daily limits for non-Indians. Resort owners say their customers have been scared away.
We're going to go down a big black hole and we're never going to come back out.
But Indian activists claim there is more to it than just economics.
Treaty fishing, that's not the issue. It's just out-and-out racism.
The courts turned down the state's request to end the spearfishing season early, so starting today, both rod and spear fishermen will be on the lakes together, and the governor is appealing for calm.
And I ask all people in northern Wisconsin, Indian and non-Indian, to refrain from confrontation, to respect the rights of others.
More than 1,000 rallied at a Chippewa reservation this afternoon, saying all they want is to fish in peace. But their opponents vow that the battle for Wisconsin's precious walleye is far from over. Gary Reeves, CBS News, Chicago.
So what are you doing at Dow these days, Peggy?
Well, right now I'm working in agricultural research, Grandpa. We're trying to help farmers find new ways to make every dollar work harder.
We want to keep this farm in the family a few more generations.
Pretty tough, isn't it?
You bet. So your dad and brother are going to need all the help they can get.
And you can make a difference in what...
What'll be at stake next week is fairly small change, but from our Washington notebook tonight, we're looking at the big face-off between the White House and Congress that comes next week on the minimum wage. While the stakes may be small, what we learned this week is the battle will be fierce.
And now you see speculation on the Hill. Well, the president's going to cave in. He can't argue over a dime or 15 cents on this, and they are just as wrong as they can be.
That was President Bush last week, setting the stage for his first real showdown with Congress on domestic policy. At issue, the minimum wage. And in fact, it's not an argument over 15 cents. It's an epic battle over twice that much, 30 cents. Congress wants to raise the minimum wage to $4.55 an hour. Mr. Bush says he'll veto it if it goes a cent more than $4.25.
It doesn't make sense. It's wrong. The American people understand it's wrong. And we're going to continue the battle until we succeed.
As is always the case in Washington, there's more to it than the issue at hand, in this case, 30 cents. In his first confrontation on domestic policy, White House strategists say it is important for the president to underscore that while he's willing to work with the Congress, he can only be pushed so far.
The president, without any hostility, feels strongly about this. He will stand his ground.
Only 6% of the nation's hourly workers make the minimum wage, but the administration argues that raising it too high will cause employers to eliminate jobs to save money, putting 500,000 people out of work.
So we don't want to saw off the bottom rung of the economic ladder for the young people to begin their career. To increase the minimum wage excessively without an effective training wage to offset lost job opportunities will cost you 500,000 jobs.
Democrats say that estimate is much too high, that it is no more than 100,000 jobs that will be eliminated, and they say that loss must be weighed against the benefits going to the millions who'll get higher pay.
It's a real red herring. I mean, the one issue is, are we going to say to working Americans, if you work in America, you're not going to live in poverty?
Next week, Secretary Dole will go before Congress to push a job training program for the unskilled. Focusing on the minimum wage alone as a solution to poverty, she says, just won't work.
We can lift people out of poverty by turning to literacy and education and skills training, by providing some help with child care for those who are at the lowest income, as the president would do through tax credits. That's the way to help people. We're on the wrong issue, really.
Wrong issue or not, the feeling is that Democrats have the votes to raise the minimum wage to $4.55, but they don't have the votes to override a presidential veto. So what will probably happen is this. Congress will pass it, the president will veto it, then Congress and the White House will compromise on another increase. That will be more than $4.25, less than $4.55. Israeli soldiers killed 4 Palestinians and reportedly wounded more than 140 others today in occupied Gaza, and an alleged collaborator with Israel was found murdered. It was the latest episode in a worsening spiral of extremism on both sides. Martha Teichner reports.
The clashes, some of the worst since the Intifada began 17 months ago, came during celebrations marking the end of Ramadan, the Muslim holy month. The violence has intensified since Wednesday, when a man stabbed his way through a crowd of Jewish shoppers in Jerusalem, killing 2 and wounding 4 others. The man accused is a 25-year-old West Bank Arab who reportedly acted on orders from the fundamentalist Islamic Jihad. There is nothing new about Arabs and Jews killing each other. What is new is a rise in fanaticism, which threatens to sabotage fragile steps toward compromise and peace. The funeral of another victim of extremism, an Arab photographer, supposedly an Israeli collaborator, killed by his own people. 14 Arabs have been murdered since mid-April, when the execution of collaborators was first ordered. Arab extremists have expanded their definition of the enemy, Israelis and now anybody who deals with them, a broad category that includes many so-called moderates.
Anybody that is suspected of not following the PLO line 100% is threatened with death and frequently gets death, murder.
But there is growing Jewish extremism as well. Jewish settlers randomly burn Palestinian cars in retribution for stoning attacks. Zealous, gun-toting Jewish settlers see any movement toward a Palestinian state as a threat to their survival, an excuse for vigilante violence.
If they're going to have only one nation, it will be us and not them.
Extremists on both sides have one thing in common: their determination to prevent elections in the occupied territories, where Israeli-Arab cooperation is now reduced to the business of survival. For example, a Jewish settler hires an Arab to fit his van with metal grills to protect it from Arab stones. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Israel.
Campaigning is well underway for next month's historic elections in Poland. The growing power of the Catholic Church is making abortion one of the most talked about issues in a country only now getting a chance for democratic debate. Bert Quint with more on that.
Throughout this turbulent decade, the Roman Catholic Church has been the refuge for Polish protesters. Today, it's the target.
Enough of black and red dictatorship. That's right here.
Is this a protest against the church?
It's the protest against the party and the church.
The issue is a bill to make abortion, long the chief means of birth control in the East Bloc, illegal.
There are no contraceptives, no nurseries, no hospitals, no schools. So, well, people don't want these children.
The anti-abortion law will be one of the first orders of business of the parliament to be elected next month. In a country that is 95% Catholic, the church has gradually gained strength, not only by speaking up for reform, but also by improving its relations with the regime by acting as referee during the recent negotiations with Solidarity. Now, these people say, the church feels strong enough to start pushing its own agenda.
And this is forcing the Catholic opinion on the whole nation.
It's part of the new spirit here. After all these years of repression, Poles are seizing the right to speak out. It's evident in the streets of Warsaw, where some youths called for a boycott of the elections and others passed out lists of candidates. They're even attacking the perennial symbol of the opposition, Lech Wałęsa, accusing him of selling out to the regime. At the same time, party chief Wojciech Jaruzelski had to talk long and persuasively at a national meeting of the Communist Party this week to placate delegates from the provinces who oppose the party's giving up its monopoly of power. Both sides are finding that a little democracy can produce unpredictable results. Bert Quint, CBS News, Warsaw.
Riot police and armored cars surrounded Johannesburg Cathedral today. That didn't stop people of all races from mourning white anti-apartheid activist David Webster, who was assassinated last Monday. Richard Wagner reports.
Thousands of people, including diplomats from 15 countries, packed St. Mary's Cathedral for the funeral service. In defiance of South African law, the flag of the banned African National Congress was displayed. Winnie Mandela made one of her increasingly infrequent public appearances. Outside the church, the overflow crowd sang, "We are not afraid to die."
The assassination of David Webster is yet another chapter in the murderous history of apartheid, a system still very much alive in the country where David Webster was killed.
As they mourned their friend, his colleagues condemned that system.
South Africa is an apartheid chamber of murder. All of us within the borders of South Africa, apartheid South Africa, are exposed to that experience of murder and murder and murder.
David Webster's companions in the struggle against apartheid see him as all but irreplaceable in their movement.
I kept saying to myself, why couldn't it be me? Not David, me. I've only got a few more years to go, and David had so many years to go.
After the church service, the mourners marched 6 miles to the cemetery. It was the largest anti-apartheid demonstration in the 3-year history of the state of emergency. The police did not interfere. David Webster lived and died for a new South Africa. He will not see it, but with his death, thousands of people who thought as he did renewed their pledge that one day there will be one. Richard Wagner, CBS News, Johannesburg.
You, behind the coffee cup.
You get a chance to express yourself. Do it right now, and Delta will foot part of the bill. Up to $35 toward installation costs. Call toll-free by May 31st for rebate details and our free brochure. Because now's the time to grab the phone. And a great deal. When you get a grip on yourself. With Delta.
Oh, boy, fruit and fiber.
No, it's new fruit and fiber.
Beg your pardon?
Mm-hmm. Well, you see, they added 25% more dates, raisins, and walnuts to the dates, raisins, and walnuts. So now it's the great tasting fruit and fiber.
Just because they added more dates, raisins, and walnuts doesn't change the name. It's still fruit and fiber.
No. Matter of fact, it's so delicious, they should call it fruit and fruit and fruit and fruit and fiber.
New Post Fruit and Fiber cereal, now with 25% more dates, raisins, and walnuts.
Well, this was Kentucky Derby Day, and this Saturday belonged to Sunday Silence, winner of the 115th Run for the Roses. Favorite Easy Goer was second, and Awe Inspiring came in third. Track announcer Dave Johnson called the stretch.
Sunday Silence, but Pat Valenzuela comes over, has little contact with Northern Wolf. On the inside, Houston is dropping out of it. Dancel is still tough. On the inside, then comes Easy Goer and Awe Inspiring, but with a 16th of a mile to go. And here comes Sunday Silence through the stretch, coming to the finish of the Derby. Sunday Silence wins this Derby by 2 lengths.
Well, it was a century ago today that the Paris Exposition featuring the spanking new Eiffel Tower was formally opened. 100 years later, tourists have found a new way to see the Eiffel Tower and other sights of Paris in comfort, though it wasn't what the planners had in mind. Doug Tennell reports.
It's the time of year again in Paris when people escape to what some Parisians call the beach. It runs right through the middle of the city along the river Seine, a place for loungers, for lovers, and for those who are still waiting for their ship to come in. But there is a bright new addition to the beach scene this year. Right alongside the famous tour boats known as the Bateau Mouche is the Bateau Bus. It is supposed to be a no-nonsense commuter system that sails right past the daily Paris traffic jam. Between the Eiffel Tower and the Ile Saint-Louis, the Bateau Bus has its own bus stops, its own commuter maps, and even signs instructing passengers not to disturb the driver. It has spawned some other new businesses, riverboats advertising the latest French films, and something called a boat burger. But there is something about the bateau bus that is not quite right. It costs a hefty 30 francs, $5, to go from the Eiffel Tower to Notre Dame. It takes 45 minutes. You can walk it in less. And nearly everyone you see on board is clutching maps and cameras.
I'm from San Francisco.
I'm from Norway. We are from England.
There is hardly a word of French to be heard here. The passengers are all from out of town. It seems Parisians are letting tourists try out the bateau bus idea first. And why not? What this bus ride offers is 45 minutes of the best views in all of Paris, uninterrupted by tour guides or by Parisians who would only complain about gridlock on the Seine. Doug Tennell, CBS News, Paris.
Well, that's the news. Connie Chung will be here tomorrow. Later tonight on West 57th, the search for the serial killer of New Bedford, Massachusetts. I'm Bob Schieffer, CBS News in New York. Good night.
This is CBS.